All right, guys, a couple notes before we start. If you haven't already, please take it easy on the sub. I'm sure whoever that person is doing us a solid, so just like, be decent human beings. I for sure have a fever and my vision is blurry, which is fun. So I say that because I might struggle at times to read the poems that I have over here. So just bear with me. I'm going to move through this rather quickly, which I'm sure you'll appreciate. I will say, though, before we begin, that there's no way this can be as in-depth as it would be if I were in class, simply because, it'd be a conversation, which is what we often try to do. I feel like straight-up lecture, which is what this has to be, just isn't as good, right? And I hope the reasons for that are obvious. So that said, if you have any questions as we go, please write them down. Especially if you're thinking about writing your explication on one of the Dickinson poems, you should ask me when I get back, hopefully Tuesday. All right. Oh, finally, my boys are around, so there's every chance they're gonna run in here like screaming or something. We'll just see how that goes. All right. 339, because we did the first one already. I like a look of agony because I know it's true. Men do not sham convulsion nor simulate a throe. The eyes glaze once, and that is death, impossible to feign. The beads upon the forehead by homely anguish strung. First thing, and I might do this a little bit out of order, but doing what I want. I hear my 7-year-old, he's gonna come up here. Anyway, that last line, some of you may have an ear. I've been trained to have one. What I mean by that, yeah, he's coming. What I mean by that is you might hear, as I do, hey buddy, you gotta go, I'm doing work. Say hi to my class.
Hi.
What do you need?
Am I able to?
That's fine, go. Do it downstairs. He's the one who got me sick. Anyway, that last line forces you to read it slowly. And I could explain that in more detail at a later date if you want. I kind of doubt that you do. But if you read it yourself and you read it properly, it will force you to read the last line very slowly compared to the rest of the poem, which is interesting given what that line is saying, right? She's kind of forcing you, you could argue, like in an explication or something, that she's formally having you experience a little bit of that, maybe what that pain would be. And this might sound like a stretch. Again, I'm not going to go super in depth, but it's almost like painful reading would be slow. Anyway. All right. So the poem itself obviously is about pain. All these are hyper famous. I'm sure you guys know that because you read your poetry. I like a look of agony because I know it's true. Those lines are super helpful, more so than a lot of her poems we read, because they mean exactly what they say. Now, of course, if you don't know all the words, you should look them up. That's what a good student would do. But agony, severe pain, right? And she says she likes the look of it, not the pain itself, which is important here. She's not a sadist, okay? Is that the word I want? I always confuse that with masochist. Don't worry about it. Anyway, because she knows it's true. Basically, the idea in the last two lines, well, the two lines after that, go a little bit further. She's saying that men, and by that, I mean, that's, how they wrote back then, that she means humans, they don't fake pain. When you're really in pain, whatever shape your face makes, maybe your body, like there's a convulsion. I've been struggling with fever. I've been like shaking a little bit. I'm not faking any of that. I don't want to be doing that. But she likes it because she knows it's true. And what's interesting to me is, why is she saying that? I guess I'm getting at, there's some reason to this poet that the truth is very important, especially when it comes to human beings and how they act with one another. And it kind of cuts through it a little bit. And I think the idea is that we're kind of fake with each other a lot. And this is maybe slightly different on its face than the truth we've been talking about with Emerson and Thoreau and Whitman. But I actually think it's part of it. I mean, if you think about how we talked about any of those people, if your great project is to identify the truth and to help other people do it themselves, and for everyone to be completely open and natural, is how Whitman talks about it, wouldn't the first step in that process be not lying to each other all the time. Even like white lies. Like a great example, if I make it in on Tuesday and one of you ask me, hey, how you feeling? I'll be like, oh, I'm good. That's probably not true. It's oftentimes not true. But why do we do that? Well, get around conversation because it's polite. That's another, so we have all these reasons societally that we've constructed. But Dickinson's point is we don't need those constructions. We need to be honest with one another. We need to be honest with ourselves as well. The rest of the poem, the eyes glaze once and that is death. Impossible to feign. She's all about talking about death. You can't fake dying for a second. And again, that may seem a bit strong, but if you're in like severe pain, I mean, again, like take a weird example, stubbing your toe, you're probably going to be all right. But if you really stub your toe for that first second, you're like, oh my God, I'm dying. Like you feel this awful thing. And she says for that split second, when you're just in the pain, all the other social constructions that you might be wearing, they fall away and you're yourself. Now you're yourself in pain, but you're still yourself. It's curious. I almost wonder if she would say that it's not entirely possible to be honest otherwise. You could argue this poem indicates that. That might be a bit of a stretch. But at the very least, she says this is like one of the only ways we can access the truth. All right, 372. This one's also about pain. After great pain, a formal feeling comes. The nerves sit ceremonious, like tombs. The stiff heart questions, was it he that bore? And yesterday, or centuries before? The feet, mechanical, go round, a wooden way of ground or air or aught, regardless grown a corpse contentment, like a stone. This is the hour of lead, remembered if outlived, as freezing persons recollect the snow, first chill, then stupor, then the letting go. All right, so again, those dashes, at least those last ones, kind of demand a pause. At least that's the school I come from with Dickinson. Again, after great pain. So this is, and I ordered them this way on purpose. This is after the agony, okay? She says, like, so in the previous poem, you have the split second where you're just like, oh my God. And then right after that is this poem. You have a formal feeling. Hang on. Sorry, I had to blow my nose. All right. So this formal feeling, the nerves sit ceremonious, like tombs. This is a pretty dense poem. This one's a little harder. So whatever group I gave this one, I do apologize to an extent. But the nerves, obviously, that's how you feel pain. And they sort of take it on as a ceremony of pain, if that makes sense. If you understand what a ceremony is, like a wedding ceremony, something like that, something kind of rehearsed, which again is interesting because that to me belies that this is true. Regardless, they're like tombs. There's that death imagery again that she loves. The stiff heart questions, was it he that bore? And yesterday or centuries before? So this is one of the places she gets really confusing. She's one of those old school writers, even for her era, where she'll capitalize important nouns, and it can be difficult to parse sometimes, which is why we stopped doing that. But anyway, the he in this case, I do think means Christ. And I say think again, because on the next line, she also capitalizes yesterday or centuries like an insane person, which to us makes no sense, but that was a convention of her day. You capitalize important nouns. It's like Sesame Street or something. Anyway, so she's saying in this formal moment, the stiff heart, you're trying to bring yourself back from that pain. You're trying to like stiff upper lip. Questions, was it he that bore? Did he feel this moment too? I would assume on the cross. I assume that's what she's talking about. That's kind of the most famous episode of pain for that guy, right? Was it he that bore yesterday or centuries before? Centuries before, I think that's pretty easy because like the way that story reads, a long time ago, right? Yesterday is interesting because obviously, again, on its face, no, right? Like that, I mean, that's pretty easy. But the fact that the speaker asks this question, I guess indicates that they're not sure. Maybe again, only in this moment, this like formal feeling moment. So they're asking themselves this question. They say the feet mechanical go round a wooden way. A wooden way would be like Look, again, I've been doing that all day with this fever. I'm walking around sometimes and trying to help my wife a little bit around the house, and I don't really feel like I'm doing it. Like, I don't feel like I'm like a robot almost. And that's kind of what she's describing, is that, and when you're in this formal feeling after the pain, you kind of just go through the motions a little bit. The feet mechanical go round a wooden way of ground or air or ought. Ground or air, I'm assuming you know what that means. You're walking on the ground or the air or anything. That's what ought means here. Regardless groan. So no matter where, again, walking here is a bit of a metaphor. It's not necessarily like you're literally walking necessarily, but you're going through your day or the formal feeling moment, right? Regardless, groan a court's contentment like a stone. This is the hour of lead. So you're in this moment, and again, you're wooden, but you're also lead, which is very heavy metal. It's a quartz contentment like a stone. You're not really a human being, as I would say, with all these descriptions. You are more natural, you're more elemental, but you're not a person really. And she says, and this is my favorite part of the poem. These are banger lines. If you don't like these, you probably don't like poetry. I'm just saying. So this is the hour of lead, remembered if outlived. It's these lines. As freezing persons recollect the snow. First chill, then stupor, then the letting go. So if you're freezing, that has an endpoint, if you understand my meaning. And if you don't, I'll talk about it here in just a second. But freezing persons, when they're freezing, she argues, recollect the snow. So they have this moment, I suppose toward the end, where they remember the snow, and like that's kind of a beautiful image as a person is freezing to death. First chill, you're cold, then stupor. Stupor shares a root with stupid, and it's one of those words we don't necessarily use entirely properly anymore. But stupor is you're totally out of your senses. You have no idea what's going on, basically. So first chill, then stupor, then the letting go. The letting go is two things. One, death, if you're freezing to death, right? But then also possibly, if outlived, she does say that. So whatever this pain is, maybe you're not freezing, you're doing something else. If you outlive it, you kind of move past it. You let go. You stop worrying, essentially. All right, let's move along. 479. Oh. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, oh God, sorry, the scrolling got messed up. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. All right, so you got some slant rhymes in there that are pretty tricky. Anyway. All right. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. More death imagery. This is her being funny a little bit, which, I mean, I'll go ahead and say Dickinson maybe not the funniest person you've ever encountered. She likes to joke about death. That's kind of a heavy topic. But obviously this is a metaphor. Death is a character here, akin to the Grim Reaper, if you're familiar with that image. But because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. She died. Now, of course, too, this didn't really happen because she's writing the poem, but go with it. So basically, when you die, whenever it occurs, it kind of just happens. You don't decide, is the point, right? The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. I don't rightly know if immortality is a character here. Again, the capitalization is wonky by our standards. Could be. Immortality, I don't believe, really comes up ever again. So whether it's a character or not doesn't really matter. But she's in this carriage with death, and immortality is around, either as a character or a concept. And if you're talking about death and immortality, you're pretty much talking about the afterlife, right? And if you recall, and it's been so many days because the schedule's been so jacked up, but her deal, like, she's deeply religious, not necessarily orthodox, but deeply religious. And so this is one of the poems that kind of talks about that a little bit. We slowly drove. He knew no haste. There's death, not in a hurry. Again, she's being funny. There's a tee-hee here. I put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. This is the first not in the poem. I had a teacher a long time ago that would call these cruxes. And the idea is, most of this poem, once you kind of figure out a little bit what's going on, it's not too bad. Moments like this is cruxes, like this crossing up where it could throw you. And you're kind of like, I don't know what that has to do with anything. My labor and my leisure too. Normally, when I teach this would be a moment where we kind of talk it out in class. Again, we can't do that, unfortunately. My reading of that is she had put away her labor and her leisure too. What is she describing in this poem? She's describing dying. So when you put something away, you're putting away your life, right? Her labor and her leisure too. My reading is that's her definition of what life is. You're either working or you're not. You're either working or you're just kind of chilling. If there's another reading available, please let me know, but that's how I read that moment. Death seems to appreciate it anyway. We passed the school. You got children, you got recess. A few of you who I looked at your notes basically said the next couple stanzas or lines or whatever seem to be the stages of life, and I don't think that's incorrect, right? So children, the fields of gazing grain, we passed the setting sun, that image, especially as setting winter, setting sun, that's pretty much always death. Fall, I'll tell you this way, the seasons for all of our history have been a great metaphor for life and then eventually death. So spring, that's what you guys are in. You're in the springtime still. Probably when you're in your 20s, late teens, getting into your 20s, that's your summer. And then somewhere along the way, you get into the fall, and that's probably where I am. I'm staring down the barrel of 40. I'm probably right about I'm in the fall. When you get really old, what you guys would consider really old, that's winter. But the sun through the sky also is a nice metaphor for that. So the setting sun, that's the end of the life, right? Now here's what's interesting. She has that image, it's pretty well trodden, okay? We passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us. That's a little bit of a science fact, so some of the nerds among us might appreciate the heliocentric view of the universe in this poem. Apart from that, though, you could potentially wonder if she's doing anything there. Like, it's a little bit interesting, to me, at least. He passed us. To me, this whole poem, up until now, and really, I think for the rest of it, is about her riding with death and kind of what that means, and, but for this one moment, again, my reading of this is you have a thing that's bigger than them. And if you remember, them is the speaker, which she's just like a person. So like, okay. And death. She says the sun, he passed us. He passes death. How do we read that? I mean, one, at least in terms of like typical lifespan, the sun outlives us, right? I don't know what Dickinson's views on the lifetime of stars might have been. I don't know that, for instance, she thought they were eternal. She might have. I mean, I don't know. But how I'd actually like to steer you is, to me, basically, it's outside of their control. They're passing all these people. They're looking at them. They kind of determine their path, she and death in the carriage. Here, for a second, she goes, oh, we passed the setting sun as well. And she's like, actually, no, I know better. The sun passed us. And it's just kind of interesting in this moment that there are some things that are outside of that realm in the poem. And the sun would be it. Time would be it, I think. All right. The dews, this might confuse you, but it's pretty easy. Go with me. The dews drew quivering and chill. Dews, what is that? When you go out early in the morning, maybe you haven't done that in a while because you are teenagers, there's dew on the ground. It's wet. Okay, drew quivering and chill. It's cold outside early in the morning when there's dew. Okay, for only gossamer my gown. Gossamer is the thin fabric. I am not super up on my fabrics, but I believe gossamer is not a real fabric. I think it's just like a catch-all term for thin fabric. But her gown is thin, essentially. Her tippet, which I don't know what that is. It's an article of clothing. That's enough for me. Is only tulle. Somebody in the room might know what that is. Again, I do know it's a fabric. And the point here is, it's cold out. She's not dressed for it. She's not ready. She's not ready to die, right? She's not prepared. I think that's pretty typical. Even a person like, Dickinson, or a speaker in this case, who obviously thinks about it a lot, doesn't mean she's ready, right? How could you be? We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. This is her grave. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Cornice is an architectural structure. It's just like a thing that comes on the roof, right? So they stop at her grave. This is a pretty bleak poem. Since then, 'tis centuries. You could gloss over this pretty quickly, the way I know some of you read. Since then, since her carriage ride with death, right? It's been centuries. So she's telling us this story, and in the last stanza she reveals the story itself occurred centuries ago, right? And yet feels shorter than the day. So she's telling us how long eternity feels. It really doesn't feel like anything. It doesn't feel like it's been a day, even though it's been centuries, right? And I'm not experienced in the afterlife, so I really couldn't say. I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. The horses pulling the carriage were heading toward eternity. You get some bleak imagery in this poem. Obviously, it's about death. But to her, to the speaker, she realizes basically that there is an afterlife, like on the carriage ride, she realizes. And so that explains like the centuries remark. That explains why she's so chill about all this, right? Like she's going to live on because there is an afterlife, and that's kind of what she's getting at here at the end. All right, last one. This is my favorite Dickinson poem. I legit put it in here. One, it is good, it is famous, but like, I put it in for me. So, 1263. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Too bright for our infirm delight. The truth's superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. This one we can do kind of fast, I think. But I want to tell you before we do, I think this is one of those poems that kind of gives you a glimpse into her whole project as a writer. This is what she's after. She talks about death a lot, but she also talks about the truth a lot. And I would even say her obsession with the truth supersedes her obsession with death, her obsession with anything else. You could argue, for instance, the couple poems we talked about before this that are about death, to her, that's more of the truth, right? And she wants to tell you, and she's trying to let you know, but how does she go about that? Well, she tells us here, tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Tell it like this. You can't tell it dead on. Why? Success in circuit lies, that's going around it. You kind of go around the truth. Too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise. The truth, this goes back to Thoreau. Whitman doesn't say this, but Thoreau does. The truth, he says, if he met a man, and I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but if he met a man who was fully awake, how could he look him in the face? If he met a man who lived the truth, who knew the truth about life and just being a person and didn't bother with all the, again, the social construction we live with, if he met that person, how could he look him in the face? It'd be too much. Same thing here. The truth, as it actually is too bright for us. We're too small. We're not ready for it, right? She gives us a metaphor here. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind. So, you guys, I'm not going to, patronize you. I'm not going to say you are children, even though legally you are. But you were children rather recently. I have kids. One of the things you do when you're a parent, sometimes things freak you out. A lightning storm could be one of those. And what do you do as a parent? Well, you tell your kids, hey man, it's all right. I know it's loud and bright, but really it's just the atmosphere doing this thing, or whatever. Or really her point. I was telling you, I give my kids like the scientific explanation. Her deal would be with explanation kind. Her deal would be you kind of get at the truth a little bit, but you don't give them the full truth. So what's one of the popular ones, like angels bowling or whatever, right? Like stuff like that, for thunder. Anyway, you give them a little bit of that, so they get maybe a smidgen of the truth that there is thunder, but like it's not a big deal. The truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. So she wants you to have the truth. She wants all of us to have the truth. It's important to her. But she contends that that truth, important as it is no good to you if it blinds you, right? So you got to get at it little by little. Maybe you got to read/write over 1,000 poems about it that make all these metaphors. Another famous poet, Keats, we won't read in here because he's British, but he said at one point, he draws a line between poets and philosophers. And the way he talks about it is, again, I'm gonna get this a little bit wrong, but basically a poet is a philosopher with a little bit of sugar. And what he means by that is they're both interested in the truth, but dude, if you ever read a philosophy treatise, is the worst. Oh my gosh, it's the most boring thing. I enjoy reading. It's the most boring thing on planet Earth because it's super scientific and analytical, and they're trying to get at the truth, which is important. Dickinson says it would blind you. Keats says it would just be boring, and so you gotta provide a little sugar, is how he puts it. She says the truth is just too amazing and you couldn't take it on yourself. Regardless, those are the Dickinson poems. I hope this helps. Again, I sincerely hope I'm back on Tuesday because this sucks. If you have any time left, hopefully you do, I want you to start in your explication, I guess, intro. If you remember, we talked about this previously. I know our schedule's all messed up, but basically the intro and these explications is just the start of your explication. So get me into the poem. If you want to talk about a big idea or two, like a theme, whatever, in your poem, you could do that. But then get me into the poem in this first paragraph. It's going to be somewhere near the beginning. It doesn't have to be exactly at the beginning. But walk me through the poem. If it's a shorter poem, like if you do one of Dickinson's shorter poems, you're probably going to have to talk about legit, like basically every line, give or take. You know, if it's a longer poem, like The Raven, you won't have time for that. So you got to pick and choose. I hear another child coming. I'm going to sign off. I hope to see you guys soon because that means I'm well enough to come in. Thanks.